Hello, everyone. I'm Eugene Daniels, a Playbook co-author and White House correspondent at Politico. I'm joined by my fellow Playbook co-author, Rachael Bade. The biggest story, both substantively and politically, in D.C. right now is the withdrawal from Afghanistan by the Biden administration. The images of chaos and confusion are seared into the memory of anyone who reads or watches the news, which are probably many of you. Many questions that still linger. Did it have to look like this? Could a successful evacuation move the needle? And most importantly, probably what comes next? Today, we will dig into all of that with our guest.
Joining us today on Political Live is Congressman Dan Crenshaw. He is a Texas Republican and former Navy SEAL who has served 5 tours of duty. He even lost his eye in 2012 fighting in Afghanistan. Thank you, Congressman, for being with us and for your service.
Thank you.
For those of you who are tuning into the live stream, you can follow the conversation on Twitter using hashtag Politico Playbook, and you can also send us questions by tweeting us at Politico Live. So, Congressman, let's just get started sort of right there with your personal connection here. I mean, you live these injuries every single day. As somebody who served in Afghanistan, what was your reaction to the chaos you have seen with this pullout over the past couple of days?
Well, it makes us all angry, those of us who have served, sometimes for different reasons. I'm frustrated above all else. I'm frustrated because I've been saying don't do something like this for years, no matter who is president. And this was an unnecessary cell phone by the United States, to say the least. So we're frustrated. Now, it's important to say I don't feel like my sacrifice was in vain. I don't feel like any veteran's sacrifice was in vain. And that's an important thing to note. Because, look, what people ask oftentimes, what did you get out of 20 years in Afghanistan, this so-called endless war? Well, we got no more 9/11s. That's what we got. And that's not nothing. That's actually pretty significant. The fact that we denied terrorist safe haven to the extent that we prevented major attacks on the homeland. And so, no, these sacrifices were not in vain. But the frustration occurs because we now know that we cannot prevent those terrorist safe havens. We now know that we're right back to the situation we were on September 10th, 2001. And as I recall, we weren't at war back then, but somebody was at war with us. And we didn't end a war by pulling our troops out this time. We just gave up a strategic position that allowed us to actually fight the people who will always be at war with us. That's a fact. That is not a debatable. That is not a debatable issue. That is a fact that many, many Americans on both sides have refused to acknowledge for the last 20 years.
So we want to get to that sort of broader debate about Afghanistan and presence or not having a presence there. But just in terms of the pullout over the past couple of weeks or couple of days, Biden has said this was unavoidable and that, to come home, there's always going to be some sort of chaos and heartbreak there. As somebody who's spent time there, would you say that is accurate?
Not quite. I mean, there's a few things to unpack from that statement. The first thing I would ask President Biden, if he believes that chaos was unavoidable, then why on earth did you do it? Because it should be pretty obvious to anybody watching that the current situation is not a superior outcome to the situation we had just a few months ago, where we had a small residual force that was maintaining stability in the country and denying safe haven at a very, very low cost to the United States. We haven't had a combat casualty in 18 months. I've been to war. That's not what war looks like. Okay, that looks like the kind of presence that we have all around the world, as a matter of fact. We're in well over 100 countries. And then the next thing I would say is, look, if you were still dead set on that outcome, this still could have been done better. I mean, the biggest thing confronting us right now, our biggest short-term goal needs to be getting our Americans out and our Afghan allies out. At least that could have been planned for, and that was not planned for at all. It doesn't seem like the Secretary of State, who was really leading the charge on this, had a plan, given what he knew about Biden's obstinance. Okay, no, I will say that I think a lot of Biden's advisors, especially the military side, I know this, advised him against doing this. But once they realized that he's not going to change his mind, there needs to be an evacuation plan, and the State Department is really in charge of that. The State Department's really in charge of making sure that process goes smoothly. There's been bipartisan outrage against the administration for months before all of this happened, because it didn't seem to us that they had any plan to get our Afghan allies out. little known to us, they also had no plan to get U.S. citizens out, and that could have been done much better. That could have been anticipated. Those of us who have served there knew full well that this was happening, and we've watched the Taliban retake more territory throughout the past few months. It shouldn't have been a surprise that they would go on offense. By the way, it's also the height of the fighting season as Biden announces this withdrawal. It shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody that they were going to go on offense and do exactly what they did.
Speaking of evacuating American citizens, I understand that you have been working since last week with specifically one of your staffers to try to get several Americans who've reached out to your office out of Afghanistan, and actually were successful in moving 15 people to safety. Tell us about what you're hearing in your office and how you're sort of addressing these issues, working with state or the Defense Department.
Sure, and a lot of congressional offices are doing this. That's just one case. Those 15 people. We've dealt with hundreds. Look, we're doing what we can. What we basically do is we connect the dots for people. They get a hold of us because maybe they've got a family member, or they've got an American sponsor that's in Texas or nearby, or there's some other connection, and we're helping them make sure that their paperwork is in order. And then we're coordinating with maybe some SEALs that I actually know on the ground, or some Marines that we know on the ground, or State Department officials, or Department of Defense officials. Mostly we're working with DOD. State Department's been very, very difficult to deal with. And we're making sure that they're on the right list and that they know which gate to go to, and that somebody hopefully is there looking out for that person. We're playing that coordination role, and it's been very effective. There's been a lot of congressional offices doing this. We shouldn't have to. It's not our job. We're happy to do it, but it's very frustrating. Again, that this process wasn't well thought out beforehand, because it's extremely difficult for people to get to the airport. This idea that any American that wants to get to the airport can is a flat out lie. And it's been a lie for a while now. If anything, it's getting harder because they'll delay flights now. They're closing gates at certain times. We're hearing that gates close at 6 p.m. For instance, the crowds are enormous. People are getting trampled to death. Okay, our soldiers are collecting dead bodies from people getting trampled. Taliban are shooting at people. We've heard reports that they're out there confiscating U.S. passports. The Taliban are not our friends. They act one way in front of all of the TV cameras right next to the gates. They act a very different way when you're outside of that. They are terrorists, after all. There's no question about who these people are. And American citizens are being hunted. Some have had to go and just say, look, I can't drag my family through this mayhem for 2 days is what it will take to get to the front. And they have to turn around. We are doing some extracts now out in the city, but very limited. It certainly hasn't been the norm. And you got to remember too, there's Americans outside of Kabul. They're everywhere. They're throughout the country. And again, our Afghan allies are throughout the country. I'm strongly advising the administration, you need to retake air bases, not just Bagram, but possibly other air bases as well that we abandoned. You need points of contact for people to go to. And we need to send a very clear message to the Taliban. We're not negotiating about our deadline. That should be the message. We should laugh at them when they say that, oh, well, that's a red line for us. You need to be out by August 31st. No. And if you get in our way when we are extracting Americans, we will kill you. That is the only message that Biden should be delivering to the Taliban right now.
So, Congressman, Americans are one thing. Afghan civilians are another, right? You've long been a supporter of legislation and policy that would bring interpreters and civilians who helped us during the war, to safety. Talk to us about why America should be saving these people, because there is a debate happening in your party about whether or not that should be happening.
Yeah, I would say there's a fringe element. I don't think there's much of a debate.
A very loud fringe element with television.
Yeah, there's a loud element. There's always fringe. They're always loud. Look, there's estimated to be maybe 80,000 people that we would call our allies, interpreters, contractors, people who've worked with us. These people have risked their lives. They've been getting death threats long before all this chaos started. That's just the norm for them. They'll get creepy calls in the middle of the night about telling them that they know where their family is and they're going to kill them. That's the Taliban's been doing this forever, and yet they kept on. Okay, they kept helping us. and they were crucial to this mission for the last 20 years. I mean, why? Because we can't talk to people, and talking to people is actually pretty important when you're on a mission, and especially when that mission, these missions have always been much more involved than just going out and capturing a bad guy. I mean, you're working with the population, you're working with tribal leaders, you're training an Afghan partner force. So these contractors, these people who have helped us, these interpreters, not only that, but they're on the front lines with us. They're in all the danger. And when we redeploy back home and get to go see our families, they're just there meeting the next team. They never get a break. These people are true patriots, and so that's why there's been a big effort in Congress to fight for them, and it passed. I mean, again, there's some opposition, but it passed. Here in Congress, so there was bipartisan support for this effort, and we need to continue that effort. Look, so I think the priority needs to be American citizens. There's estimated between 10 and 15,000 American citizens, and then on top of that, 80,000 of our allies, and they absolutely need to be considered.
Congressman, I want to talk a little bit about that fringe element that you mentioned, that I mentioned and then you mentioned. They have argued a couple of things. One, that the bungled pullout was intentional to try to bring refugees to the United States. And like I said, that we shouldn't bring these people here after them being vetted and going through the whole process. What do you say to those Republicans, fringe or not, who are, as we said, a very loud and well-funded aspect of the right wing?
I mean, when you hear an argument like this was purposefully bungled just for the sake of being refugees home, I just kind of ignore these things because, and that's probably the right reaction to them, just be dismissive. Because it is a bit paranoid and it's a bit silly, it's a bit conspiratorial.
A lot of people are hearing that argument, right? There are millions of people who watch and listen to people that are spreading those kinds of things.
Yeah, I monitor conservative social media pretty well. It is not an argument that is very prevalent. I know it was said by a couple people out loud, like you said, in a very loud way. It is not something I've seen gain a huge amount of traction. I'll just be honest. So, and I would be honest if it was or wasn't. This just isn't one of those things. So I'm not as concerned about it. And look, in the end, the argument is simple. This administration screwed this up so badly. It is folly to think that they were actually playing 4D chess the whole time just to get refugees in. I mean, they're doing a fine enough job of that at our southern border. They don't need Afghans to add to that mix. Also, I don't think a single Afghan coming to the United States would ever vote for the Democrat Party after seeing what Joe Biden did to them. So, it's not. I'm not sure. I think their arguments are silly, and that's all. That's really all I can say.
I want to ask you about, you'd mentioned, bringing people to the United States or just getting people out of harm's way in terms of interpreters and folks who have worked with American troops. I mean, I heard a story about you just the other day about your own interpreter, Rockman. And I was wondering if you could just maybe spend a minute telling us about what happened in that situation. Obviously, the long-term consequences of not taking care of these people who help our troops, is there a long-term implication if American troops in the future need, local civilians' help, and if they can't rely on the United States, the sort of backlash that we could see for, people who serve our country like yourself?
Yeah. So two questions there. There's definitely strategic failure here. There's real problems now with our NATO allies. Our NATO allies are extremely unhappy with this. They were left out to dry. You might have heard the story of the daring British SAS mission that had to occur to save their people. Because look, our NATO allies are relying on our infrastructure to be able to continue to do the mission. They advised the Biden administration not to do this, just like our military leaders advised the Biden administration not to do this. That is an enormous strategic failure. And of course, that trickles down. It's not just the leaders of NATO, it's also any country we ever work with. You see the Chinese already propagandizing the Taiwanese. Look, America will never have your back. They're just going to cut and run. And what's our arguments against that? I'm not sure there is one after this debacle. And then at the ground level, like you said, people will be very reluctant to work with us after they've seen what's happened to Afghans who did work with us. It's, the people who are just so willing to say, well, look, it was time to end the war. And that's really the depth of their argument. They don't actually know what they're talking about. They just say that line over and over again. And somehow that makes it all worth it. Somehow that makes it okay to ignore all of these strategic implications. And that's been a stupid way of thinking and it's happened on both sides for just a long time now. Rahman is a great example of who these people really are. Again, he got no breaks. I remember this mission very well because it was the only time we ever went to Helmand Province. I went to Helmand Province once and I got blown up. Because we worked mostly in Kandahar Province, which was just as bad. But this particular mission, we were relieving a Marine Special Operations unit who had been in firefights for a few days now, running out of batteries, running out of ammo. We needed but we wanted to maintain presence there. And as we were moving through a portion of this village, an abandoned compound, this abandoned house, which are often used as fighting positions and also laden with IEDs, as we were trying to clear it the best we could, Rahman was being called to interpret something, to do his job. And that's how these missions are. These guys are just running from place to place because people need them. I need to talk to this person. I need to say something to maybe our Afghan commando partners. Maybe I need to say something to this particular villager. And so they're always running around. And as he was doing that, he stepped on an IED right in front of me. And he lost all 4 limbs right away. He later died in the hospital. And I could hear. I couldn't see him because I was blinded right away by the blast. But I could hear the whole thing. I remember it very well. And this is one of those guys who would maybe half jokingly talk to us about coming back to America one day so that he could become a Navy SEAL. So, to say that these people don't deserve our at least some minimal amount of effort to get them to the United States is crazy.
I'm sorry you had to experience that. We're close to out of time here. I know you have a briefing you have to run to on this very issue, but a 2-part question to sort of wrap things up. You've talked about, wanting to keep a presence in Afghanistan. And at the beginning of the show, you talked about, how the public does not support that. A quick question on that. You've sort of criticized your own party in this sort of I think you called it the quote, endless wars crap. Talk to us about what you would do or would have done in Afghanistan in terms of keeping this residual presence there. And how do you justify that to an American public who is very sick of, a 20-year war where they feel like they're, the costs outweigh the benefit there?
Yeah, well, I just disagree with the premise of the endless war crowd. They're lying, right? They're lying about the situation. So they want you to believe that you have this third option where you can just pull the troops home and then, it'll be fine over there. Like, we don't have to worry about it anymore. That's never been an option. The option has always been chaos and terrorist safe haven or a small residual force. That's always been the 2 options. Neither of these are great options. I don't like either option, but those are the options. And anybody who denies that is lying. Again, we were not at war on September 10th, 2001, but somebody was at war with us. And we didn't end any wars, right? Let's say we weren't doing all of this chaotic stuff right now and that we had just pulled out. Would we have ended a war? Of course not. No. I mean, in fact, there was 5,000 people just released from a prison in Kabul, many of which were ISIS. They're at war with us. They'll always be at war with us. Al-Qaeda will always be at war with us. It is folly to think otherwise. And then you have to ask, were we really at war over the last few years? I mean, since 2014, since Obama had announced this transition to basically instead of combat operations, a security assistance mission, we lost an average of 6 to 7 troops every year. In the last 18 months, we've lost 0. It doesn't exactly sound like a war to me. And in this simplistic sloganeering that so many people have engaged in has driven our foreign policy. Again, we've allowed emotion to drive foreign policy. And when you do that, when you let your feelings take control, this is what happens. And so people are simultaneously mad at Biden for allowing this chaos to happen, but they'll But they're still like, yeah, but you got to bring all the troops home. Well, you can't have it both ways. That is the reality of the situation. And I wish it were different, but I don't get to write a fiction novel about how I wish it was. I have to live in the reality of what it is. And what it is there's people who want to kill us, and we can either just take that risk like we did prior to 9/11, or we can do something about it. But sticking our head in the sand doesn't mean the problem goes away. It just makes us a really easy target. And now we have 0 eyes and ears on the ground. We have no bases around. The State Department did no work ahead of time to try and make sure that we would maybe have air bases in Pakistan, anything. There's this idea that we can do counterterrorism operations from over the horizon. It's complete nonsense. It's not true. Not in a place like Afghanistan. And now we're at much bigger risk than we were before. Here's the last thing I would say. So, okay, Daniel, how long would you stay there? That's the question. I would stay there as long as the cost-benefit analysis works in favor of staying there. So right now, it's pretty clear to everybody that the cost of leaving have been far greater than the cost of staying just a few months ago. Huge, much worse. Okay, well then when do we leave? We leave when the benefits of leaving are greater than the benefits of staying. That's when we leave. And that analysis has to be done every day. And that's the decision that our policymakers have to make since the day that we went into Afghanistan. And everybody agreed to go into Afghanistan, even Biden. Okay, so from that day forward, that was always the decision. Okay, what's the cost benefit here? And it's not an easy decision. There are no good options there. We could have left 19 years ago. Well, fine. In the last 19 years, it would have been under Taliban control and a terrorist safe haven, just like pre 9/11. Is that really a superior outcome? Oh, but at least you got to say you brought the troops home. Well, troops like me don't need your support. Okay, we don't need your pity. We don't need your compassion. We're not victims. We know exactly why we were going. That's why I say our service was not in vain. And so I just hope that this situation uncovers a reality check for so many people who have been wrong on this.
Congressman, we know you have to go, but I have one quick question. I don't know how quickly we're going to be able to ask and answer it, but I'm going to give it to you. We can't have you here without kind of asking about the state of your party, kind of overall. About 2 weeks ago, you had a back and forth with an attendee at a fundraiser about the election. You told him and the crowd, quote, "Don't kid yourself into believing that's why we lost," talking about voter fraud. 5 different states, hundreds of thousands of votes. You're kidding yourself. You voted to certify the election, saying Congress didn't have the power to overturn an election. You wrote an op-ed the day after the insurrection, essentially explaining to people how elections work and why Congress couldn't do that. You also signed on, though, to an amicus brief asking the Supreme Court to invalidate the results of the election in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. But the entire lie from President Trump that there was massive voter fraud that flipped the election has clearly permeated the Republican Party. The reaction to you the other day makes that very clear. How important is it, with elections coming up very soon, for the party to kind of excise what some call anti-democratic sentiment out of the GOP, or is it already too late?
Okay, a couple of things really quick, because I do have to go.
Yeah.
The amicus brief, you mischaracterized the amicus brief, which often happens. Like the amicus brief was a simple question to the Supreme Court about the constitutionality. We said make a statement about the constitutionality of state legislatures, allowing these changes to happen without an actual vote, right?
Legal experts said there was an actual request.
Didn't argue with you about it. That was not. No, if you actually read it, it doesn't mention that at all. You can make that case about the lawsuit, but I never signed on to a lawsuit. In any case, I thought the reaction from the other day was a bit strange, because I've never been on that train, so I don't know why it was a surprise to anybody. My stance has always been the same. Election fraud is real, and Democrats don't take it seriously. You have to. An election is a competition. An election is a competition. You have to have very strict rules of the game in any competition. And Democrats will say, well, it should be easier to vote. Well, guess what? It's already very easy to vote. And you know what? I want it to be easier to score a touchdown. I can't just make the end zone big. That's not how it works. You have to have rules of the game that you agree on. This has always been the Republican stance. And, but I stand by what I said. I mean, I'm just because election fraud is real
but Congressman, widespread election fraud.
That's why Trump lost.
Widespread election fraud is not correct.
Sorry?
widespread.
So how much election fraud is okay with you?
No, it's not that. Well, I'm a reporter.
Six
It's not
votes,
that it's okay
10
with me.
votes.
It's just that the idea
How much
that
is okay?
widespread election fraud is not
Okay,
true.
so then you agree with my position, then that I don't think that's why Trump lost, but it's also a serious problem that needs to be addressed.
There are things that have happened where you see after every election where there's a little bit of fraud here, but it's never widespread and it would never change.
So what's your point? So don't worry about it? Is that your point?
Well, it's not that don't worry about it, but I think that,
So you agree with my position then?
What Donald Trump said was that there was widespread voter fraud, and that is what is permeating.
So I think what you're saying is you agree with my position?
I'm not agreeing with anyone's position. I'm just pointing out the facts of the case.
I appreciate you agreeing with my position because that is my position.
I didn't say I agreed with your position.
There is voter fraud, and it's very serious, and it should be addressed. That is really as simple as that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much you find. I mean, there's hundreds of cases in just Texas alone of actual indictments. There's hundreds of cases of voter fraud. It's definitely not as minimal as you might suggest, but it sounds like we agree.
Cases out of millions of people in Texas.
Sorry?
That's the cost benefit analysis you were talking about, right? Hundreds of cases versus millions of people that live in Texas.
How is that a cost benefit? Explain to me the cost benefit there. There's people who win elections by 6 votes. I won my first election by 155 votes. So again, every single vote actually does matter. So hundreds of cases matters quite a bit. There's a member of Congress that won by 6 votes. So yes, every single one matters. And so again, I'm glad we agree. I got to go, guys.
Right.
Thank you, Congressman, for joining us this morning. It was great having you. Great discussion. If you're not a subscriber yet, what are you doing? You can sign up for Playbook by visiting politico.com/playbook.
And remember, you can follow upcoming Politico Live programming on social media at Politico Live. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Take care.